Hey everybody, this is Wendy Ponomarenko. I'm the librarian and art teacher at Temple Emanu-El. And tonight's book, as part of our ongoing library project, is In God's Name by Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso and illustrated by Phoebe Stone. Hope you enjoy. Okay, this is In God's Name by Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso and illustrated by Phoebe Stone. After God created the world, all living things on earth were given a name. The plants and the trees, the animals and the fish, and each person, young and old, had a special name. But no one knew the name for God, so each person searched for God's name. The farmer called God source of life. The girl with the outlook as bright as the sun called God creator of light. The man who tended the sheep in the valley called God shepherd. The tired soldier who fought too many wars called God maker of peace. The artist who carved figures from the earth's hard stone called God my rock. Sometimes the people who called God by different names were puzzled. They said, every living thing has a single name. The marigold, pansy, and lily, the oak tree, sequoia, and pine. God must have a single name that is greater and more wonderful than all other names. Each person thought his or her name for God was the greatest. Each person thought her name for God was the very best. The farmer, who called God source of life, said this is the true name for God. The girl, who called God creator of light, insisted this is the most splendid name for God. The shepherd, the soldier, the artist believed they each had the perfect name for God, but no one listened, least of all God, and so each person kept searching for God's name. The woman who cared for the sick called God healer. The slave who was freed from bondage called God redeemer. The grandfather whose hair was white with years called God Ancient One. The grandmother who was bent with age and sorrow called God Comforter. The young woman who nursed her newborn son called God Mother. The young man who held the hand of his baby daughter called God Father. And the child who was lonely called God Friend. All the people called God by different names. They tried to tell one another that their name was the best, the only name for God, and that all other names were wrong. But no one listened, least of all God. And so each person kept searching for God's name. Then one day, the person who called God Ancient One, and the one who called God Friend, and the one who called God Mother, and the one who called God Father, all the people who called God by a different name came together. They knelt by a lake that was clear and quiet, like a mirror, God's mirror. Then each person who had a name for God looked at the others who had a different name. They looked into God's mirror and saw their own faces and the faces of all the others. And they called out their name for God, source of life, creator of light, shepherd, maker of peace, my rock, healer, redeemer, ancient one, comforter, mother, father, friend, all at the same time. At that moment, the people knew that all the names of God were good, and no name was better than another. Then all at once their voices came together, and they called God One. Everyone listened, most of all, God. This book, In God's Name, by Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso, is part of a series of books that she did. She did God in Between, God's Paintbrush, For Heaven's Sake, as well as lots of others, including even a biography about the first female rabbi. But as far as the ones that I just showed you, she did a series of books that were all kind of helping children grapple with the idea of what is God, and trying to make it as identifiable and kind of clear as possible, which is almost impossible for this particular concept. But I think she does an all right job, and or at least she communicates the concept in a way that is very age appropriate, which I find to be very comforting, and I find these books to have wonderful value. Sandy Eisenberg Sasso was only the second female rabbi to be ordained in all of America, and this was back in 1974. And she was the first of those two to then go on and like have a family. So she's got a very special place in kind of Jewish American history, and she's got this wonderful series of books that she's written, as well as even some other media she's done, like recordings and things like that. She's probably an amazing person based on her body of work. She's definitely a wonderful thinker. So yeah, this book right here has wonderful illustrations and tries to bring the concept of togetherness and uniqueness, but at the same time everybody's uniqueness of looking at the same thing, and yet everybody identifying that in their own way, but it still being the same thing. So that's a wonderful concept that she illustrates to basically show the different cultural differences of how different people look at the same concept, same thing. And that's really the theme of a lot of her books regarding defining God. And so this book can be found in the Judaism section of the Juvenile stacks, and I hope to bring several other of her books to you too. Hope you enjoy.